Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this discussion on writing winning government proposals. I'm here with my colleague Diana Apostolides, who is our senior associate at Jan Clark Consulting. Just very briefly, a bit of background on us and our work and the firm. So Jan Clark Consulting was founded in February 2021, and our mission is to empower nonprofits to be more confident and successful in their work with government, both in terms of funding, in terms of advocacy. And obviously, a big part of our work is around proposal development as well. We work with clients through the entire cycle of building a strategy on how they should approach government for the first time, on developing excellent quality proposals when they have opportunities, as well as then following up after you've been funded on how you can maintain that funding and get it renewed, and also continue to influence government policy all the way through that cycle. So those are our kind of core offerings. Both Diana and I have a extensive background in proposal development, specifically focusing on Global Affairs Canada, especially. But we've also both developed many proposals for many different kinds of funders and different kinds of government funders as well during our careers. But probably between us, I think it would be very fair to say we have written more than maybe 50 proposals between us, something like that, I imagine, if not more. I may be underestimating. And at one point, I was the lead for business development at Save the Children Canada, which is the portfolio that does all of the work focusing on Global Affairs Canada proposals. And Diana also had that role as well more recently. So we're here also today to talk to you about our upcoming workshop, which is coming up Friday, June 9th. And we're very excited about the chance to bring some of our many hard-fought years of proposal expertise to you in a, I think, quite unique and innovative and digestible format. I can definitely tell you that if you're coming to the workshop, you're going to get a lot of good information on that you maybe haven't heard in other places, about how to approach a proposal in the way that's going to make it the most relevant, the most compelling, and the most likely to get funded as well. So Diana's been working on kind of giving the run of show of the workshop, the agenda for the workshop, and I'm going to hand it over to her now briefly just to talk about some of the key things that we're going to be covering.
Perfect. Thank you, Jessie. I also wanted to speak a little bit to my background as well in business development, because it's very much informing sort of how this workshop is being developed. So I, similar to Jessie, have worked in international development for over a decade, and largely in roles that combined business development, program design, and grants management. It's really only ever since I started working here in Canada, actually, that I've noticed the roles are often divided. Not in every case, but it was more common for me in the organizations that I worked for previously to kind of have both hats. So I spent, a number of years working in abroad in developing contexts, and one of my very first jobs was with one of the largest French NGOs. And I worked with the partnerships and programs team and really focused on developing these institutionally funded grants, but they were not global affairs. They were European Union. They were, the British bilateral development agency, the German bilateral, the Japanese bilateral development agency. And what I can say is there's a lot of commonality when it comes to the planning and program design frameworks that a lot of major governments use. The other sort of influence I wanted to speak to as well was I have a background educationally in development. I have a master's in development studies. More recently, I completed a program with Carleton University on public policy and program evaluation. And that program really opened my eyes to sort of the larger field, the larger literature of program theory, and sort of how M&E sits, monitoring and evaluation, how it sits and how it's institutionalized within government. So some of the authors, the research, the schools of thought that I learned from that sort of program, I also find it to be incredibly relevant to the topic at hand. So to kind of give a very high level overview of what we're thinking to do and what we're planning to do for this proposal development workshop. One thing to say, we recognize that we are obviously working in Canada. And so as a lot of what we're going to be going through in this workshop is, I think, very, very applicable to different contexts. Where relevant and where it's useful, we plan to mention very sort of Government of Canada specific considerations. So we want to try to balance both having more of like a general subject matter, but making sure that we, where relevant, contextualize it for the Canadian context. So this is a full day workshop. We're planning on June 9th from 9 a.m. until 3 p.m. And the idea is to sort of break up the day by focusing sort of the first half on the theoretical kind of underpinnings of developing a program. And so what we want to do is sort of ground the discussion in the policy framework that we're working in. So when it comes to the Government of Canada and its own planning and reporting and accountability to, taxpayers, there is a framework, there is a policy framework that really is the impetus for results-based management. We want to talk through that a little bit, just to give a little bit of grounding. Then the sort of second theoretical topic is looking at the sort of wider literature and schools of thought when it comes to program theory. Like I said, there's a wide literature. There's a wide school of practice on this. It was very much the focus of my studies, and I think there's a lot that's really helpful that we don't often address or talk about, at least in our field, in our sector of international development. Developing a program design, sometimes it can be quite formulaic because we are trying to sort of check the boxes when it comes to donor compliance and requirements. But I think it would be really interesting to sort of learn a bit beyond that. And so that's going to be sort of the focus for that morning segment. And then the second half of the day, we really want to share with you all, the best practices, the tips, the tools that Jesse and I have amassed throughout our careers, especially in business development across a number of organizations. I myself have worked for, I want to say, 7 different organizations in the international development realm, some of which are incredibly sophisticated when it comes to their sort of internal systems and processes and teams for developing proposals. And so there's a lot that I know myself and Jesse, we've picked up along the way. So we do really want to focus that kind of afternoon on giving you kind of our best tips and practices when it comes to the planning and executing a proposal development process itself. So yeah, I think in a nutshell, that's what we're sort of hoping to do.
Amazing. Thank you. And thanks for the overview. I think I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. So one is I think that the piece that you were talking about at the beginning around program theory and development of theory of change, and also the understanding of frameworks, is something that cannot be maybe emphasized enough. And I think it's also, I think it's something some people are aware of. Others who are working government proposals, it depends. It depends on the sector. It depends on their level of experience. They may or may not be aware. But I think that's the kind of thinking, analysis, and tool that really sets a proposal apart from other proposals. I think when you're submitting a proposal for application in a very competitive environment, the fact that you've actually referred back to those frameworks and really done that deep thinking around what is the change that we're trying to accomplish, and what is the evidence that the strategy that we've picked will help us get there, and that you're able to make a very clear, tell a very clear story, essentially, in the proposal about how that will happen. And even better when it's grounded in your own organizational evidence and experience as well, in addition. So I think that's a really unique aspect, and I think one that people coming to the workshop will really benefit from. I think also, I mean, as you mentioned, we have a whole host of tools, tips, and tricks that for various levels of complexity of organizations and complexity of proposals that we've used. But a lot of that would, be, well, I'm sure that we can pull things out from all of that are relevant to anyone submitting a proposal. So I wanted to also just mention that, and maybe ask you to reflect on that a bit, Diana, in terms of, I mean, certainly we have that Global Affairs Canada background, and that's been the main focus for both of us in terms of the kinds of proposals we've done. And I've done certainly some for other federal departments, other provincial departments, to a lesser extent. But I would say that what we're going to be talking about, I think, is relevant to anyone who's submitting a government proposal, because if you're able to integrate these kinds of tools and approaches, even though, depending, I mean, you may be looking at a more simple application, you may be looking at something that's shorter, but to the thinking in advance, that will show through in the proposal. And it will often, it's a process you can do maybe once and then have it guide, several proposals that you're working on if they're around the same program. So I don't know, maybe your thoughts in terms of how this is relevant to kind of non-GAC proposals as well, and non-development proposals.
Yeah. So this is obviously, the focus is on government funding. And what I find is I've worked for like foundations, for example, and we also support clients who are domestic focused, and they are working with sort of lower levels of government. I think what I've observed is, especially when it comes to lower levels of government, the emphasis on results-based management isn't always there. But at least for the federal level, absolutely, you need to design, report on your projects, initiatives within this results-based management framework. And that framework applies not only at the design phase. So our workshop really is going to be looking at sort of that initial, so design, project conceptualization, that sort of phase. Results-based management is very much grounded in program theory, which again, we're going to be talking about in the workshop. But results-based management looks at the entire project lifecycle. So we're not going to be necessarily looking at everything, but the argument would be that if you plan, if you do a good job at that sort of initial stage, like you've alluded to, Jesse, it's going to only strengthen your implementation and strengthen your ability to report and meet donor compliance requirements. So program theory it's not just a Canada thing. It's not just a Government of Canada thing. It's very much been adopted by a number of governments. I think starting in the 80s, it's been something that it's almost like a paradigm of how to plan and how to inform like funding decisions when it comes to government initiatives. So it's definitely, that's the idea for this workshop is to make it very generalizable, I think, but making sure that where necessary, where there are some differences, there aren't a ton, but where there are some specific Canada government considerations, we want to make sure that we do raise those, because we know that likely people attending this will be working in the Canadian context. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, definitely. Working in the Canadian context or wanting to learn more about Canadian government funders, et cetera. Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I think that's what we want to get across, is that the tools and tips that we're bringing to you, regardless of whether they're, particularly I would say anchored in our own experience in terms of the international development sector, but they're very applicable to many different sectors. And I think also just in terms of overall strengthening the quality of programming. And I think also making your own internal systems work better and more effectively, your own internal operations. A lot of the afternoon content will be focused on those kinds of really practical tools and techniques. How do you decide whether you should go ahead with a particular opportunity? What are the kinds of questions you should be asking? How do you figure out who within your organization or outside can be part of the proposal development process, and who needs to be part of it, sign off at which stage? All of these things that can take a lot of effort when you're getting started. And we've already thought them through for many different kinds of organizations, and can give you some clear strategies. So I hope that you're able to join us on Friday, June 9th. The link is in below the chat here. If you're interested or have any questions, you can reach out to either of us on LinkedIn, or else follow the link in the chat as well. But we hope you're able to join us, and I think it's going to be an exciting day of learning. So thanks again to everyone for joining us today. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions about proposal development for government funders. Thanks so much, Diana.